Okay, so yeah, just a couple of moments we'll get into. Today's going to be mostly me talking, but hopefully we'll have a break and we can talk a little time to talk about your designs and the color that you've applied. I put my comments in. I thought they were really very good overall. And I wanted to show you an actual real project that just came to my inbox that I liked a lot, that is a cafe with a lot of color in it, but we'll take a look at it in a moment. Okay, folks are showing up. And so today will mostly be me talking. Talk. And next Monday on campus, we will have a presentation from 1 hour from the head of Jefferson's interior design program. So that will be starting at 12:30. I'll reconfirm that. And then, just to make you totally nervous and uncomfortable, we'll do a quick review, and then we will do a color quiz. And it's not what's your favorite color. We'll discuss that when we're all together. But it is questions, 10 questions worth 1 point each. And it's going to be open book, open notes. The questions are all multiple choice. So they're a little, and some of them do annoying things. I mean, I wrote it, but there's a bunch of them that are just what you hate in multiple choice questions that say, all of the above are true, none of the above are true, A and C are true, whatever. So those are the tricky ones that you have to take some time with. So, but yes, 10 questions, open everything. And I just, want to get a feel for where people are. And one could argue on a couple of the questions that color, it was really hard to come up with questions about color that have yes or no's, because there's just not a lot that's absolute law. There's a lot of sort of, they're not really rules, they're just sort of tools to help us do work with color and work with color harmonies. But there's a lot, it's really hard to have questions that there is a right and a wrong answer about color, but it is possible. So are there any questions? So if you, like I said, if you can't join us in person, make sure that you can connect to the campus computers using that remote connection. I'm gonna go over that and your projects, the renderings will be due by midnight Wednesday. So if you are picking up some stuff, that will be when they're due. So they're not due at the end of class or before class, because I really want to make sure we have time to go over these things. And then we'll start moving into the design of the cafe. We're kind of wrapping up the unit on color. Not that I don't want you to keep thinking about it, and we'll do stuff now that we're back on campus. I'm going to do work with our materials library and our light box, so that's going to be really good for things that we simply couldn't do online. So that's what we've got in store. Exciting previews of things to come. And then we'll concentrate on the cafe and the design and the theme and the color theme. You have one more project to do, which is color and culture, which is just kind of a fun project, but it's actually really helpful to think about the cultural context of color. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And I really like it. Well, we will try to print them out. It's really fun to have them in the room that we're in, because those rooms are so boring as far as the colors, and to have these really colorful 11 by 17s up is a really nice thing to have. So, but I'm not going to, we'll see. I don't think we'll go through like what it takes to get, I would like you to print them now that we will be on campus, but. So before I plunge in, do folks have any questions or answers? Anything at all? Requests? I'm just trying to think if there's anything. Okay then, well, let's pick up. And my goal is today is to finish most of the talks that are about color. Wednesday, we'll get into rendering. Monday, we'll have the visit, virtual visit. We'll have a quick review of color, and then you'll take the quiz. The quiz is only 10 questions. Read them carefully. It shouldn't take you long, but some of them, I must admit, whoever came up with these questions, which was me, made them a little tricky. So that's just, but there's some of them are real easy too. So let's get started. So let me pull up PowerPoint. Yes, PowerPoint. Okay, and pick up where I left off. And we go. Share. Okay, so we were talking about color in different functional contexts, and we ran out of time once I got to healthcare facilities. The color is very important in healthcare. The difficulty is, of course, the balance between being clean and the appearance of cleanliness, which is really important, and not being deadly. So here we get, a complementary scheme, nice earthy tones, greens and terracotta. I was actually for my annual checkup at the doctor, and their interior looked a little bit like this. This is a hospital interior. We probably don't want to look like this. I deliberately turned it into a black and white image, but pretty stark and intimidating. So this is these are becoming more the fashion is for people that can afford it is a luxury suite in a hospital room. And here you can see a lot of warm colors, making you feel comfortable, soothing. It's mostly not a lot of contrast. It's, a lot of wood tones and wood. So that's that notion to make people feel warm and comfortable, relaxed. Also got a spectacular view there. And here, this is kind of interesting. This is just in terms of healthcare this is for a memory care unit, people with various forms of Alzheimer's. And one of the things is that even maybe as our faculties decline, as someone's faculties decline, is we're still really attuned to color. It's one of those things that we do hold on to. So color helps to differentiate things and figure out where you want to, orient people as well. Oops. And then we get into the functional stuff of hospital bathrooms. I mean, there's a little bit of relief in here, but it's pretty grim. And we want to get away from this. It really doesn't cost anything to put a little bit of color into the room. And there are studies. I don't know if I give them great credence. That certain color environments, particularly warm or cool environments, or those that are filled with color, help for people's health and mental well-being. So it's a whole study. I mean, there's also the approach or attitude in color that that neutral colors and whites and grays are actually relaxing. It's why airports have a lot of gray in them and white. That's really, again, a matter of choice and opinion. I would prefer something as far as some color here. here in operating room, and this is something I work on. I did do some operating rooms in my day. And this is like here to give some visual relief from people that are be spending a lot of time working in a little bit of contrast to what's going on in the operating table. And you can do this fairly easily with different poured in place epoxy floor systems, change the color of the floor at a minimal additional cost. So here we see that, yeah, if you go to a hospital and you see that typically nurses' desks are, you know, green and brown or other kind of earthy colors, that's going to be kind of typical. And a waiting room in sort of muted, warm colors to try to make you feel comfortable. I hope it succeeds. And, you know, exam rooms that, you know, also are warm, have at least a little bit of wood tone, something that isn't just white and plastic. So it really, and there are people that really specialize in this as the next area we're going to get to. So healthcare is just a really, you know, always expanding, and in terms of design, a really interesting piece. I have one thing. I talked to an architect who was doing the hospitals at Penn. This was a long time ago, though. And I said, you know, there's this one thing that in the, here, I don't have a picture of it, but visiting someone in the hospital, there was like this really weird, really busy red wallpaper behind the patient. And I said, you know, that wallpaper, that's really strange. I found it really irritating. And they said, well, that was deliberate, is we don't want visitors to hang around. I was like, really? Okay. It was very, very strange. I don't think that wallpaper is there anymore, but fortunately I haven't had to go to the hospital or visit anyone there in recent times. Transportation equipment and facilities have similar constraints to the issues of hospitals, in that they need to feel hygienic, and also they, you know, and calming, stimulating and calming all at the same time. So it's quite difficult. Certainly SEPTA hasn't managed it very well with their transit stops. Here, I believe this is in Dubai, I could be wrong. And, you know, brilliant colored floors, cool colors, looking a little bit at Arabic architecture for some information. So it isn't that one can't have drama. This is more typical of an airport, although that carpet tile is really busy. A little color maybe in the chairs, but the rest of it, shades of gray. And, you know, this pattern in the carpet is mostly to cover up dirt. So if people aren't going to airports as much recently, maybe you are, just take a look around and like wonder at the color scheme. Like I say, I was very lucky that I had a sabbatical, and one of the things was I traveled a lot, and I got to airports all around the world. And one of the things that was really perplexing was they didn't all look the same, but they all used the same color schemes. This could be anywhere. I don't actually know where it is, come to think of it. And it was really odd, because you would think they would want to either give you something really dramatic, like, wow, this is a really cool place I've come to, or something that relates to the local architecture. And the only airport that I saw that was different was the airport in Venice, which actually was kind of, for an architect, was slightly annoying. It had fake blonde wood floors and fake brick walls. But at least it looked different. It didn't look like this. So, and that was like a lot of reinforced concrete and stuff like that. And then we get into transportation, we get into cruise ships, and, you know, making it festive and lively. I've actually never been on a cruise ship. Any of you done that? Yeah, yeah, I don't know. I think these are Disney. I'm not quite sure. I think they are. I know the next one is. Well, at least, with these, it's to make so, you're using rich and dramatic color palettes, well, like we'll see in casinos, to make people feel excited, to feel like they're, doing something, they're out of their ordinary world, particularly the mirrors over the bed. Okay. This is Disney. And here, actually, primarily, it would be good. There's a little bit of the yellow in this, but it is, using the lighting as well as the carpet and the walls as to create something of a triad. And again, rich colors, the red carpet for dining. So we go into a quite different world, industrial facilities. Sometimes there is a trademark color. Sometimes it's just what the materials available in, particularly the coatings that people use on floors, the non-skid, highly cleanable floors. I've worked on a few small facilities like this, and they only come, or at least when I worked on them, they only come in a small range of colors. So you don't get a lot of choices because they're, chemically highly complex, and it's really not about appearance, but sometimes it's about appearance. The guy is wearing a red cap at Coca-Cola, but mostly, we're keeping things really easy to be cleaned and maintained. And occasionally we'll do stuff, color here to particularly warn people about vertical elements, things they don't want to collide with. So, whoops. So just end with a few images, go through them rather quickly. And so, and what obviously residential, and the color scheme here is what, folks? Oops. Oh, why is that not coming up? Come on. Here we go. Anybody?
Can you repeat the question?
Excuse me? Oh, can I repeat? Yeah, so what's the color scheme here?
Complementary.
It's close to a complementary. It's actually, it's a sort of red-orange. So, working against dark blue. So it's kind of complementary. It's almost like two parts of a triad. Here's one that is a lot closer to being what? It's got a little complementary going on, but it is a
Split complementary.
Yeah, there's some complementary going on in some of the upholstery, but it's red, yellow, and blue. So that's the primaries, and that's a triad. Predominantly blue and cool analogous scheme for a really wacky hospitality interior. Something a bit of a complement. Again, yellow and blue are not exactly complements of each other, but they almost could be. It actually should be more of a violet. It's the Swedish colors. My internet connection is unstable. Well, let's see if it keeps going. Okay. Here, and this is mostly from what we can tell, analogous, really a monochrome. Here, this is mostly a natural warm with a little bit of a complement to it. And here's essentially a completely achromatic scheme, not even really using grays, but very much a classic kind of modernist interior. And here's kind of the cliche of a Mexican restaurant with using lots of bright colors and maybe not any particular color scheme. And here's a rich interior. There's a lot of, it's right on the edge of maybe having a few too many colors, but at least it's being dominated by a couple different, a yellow, green, and a turquoise. And then we're getting the other color in the pillows and accents so that it, gives a bit more richness. And one person's richness is busy, could be busy for someone else. So that's why it's the most fun. And yet we get, man, that brown and green again for a hospital. Just, I don't know. Really dark tones for, I've actually seen these. I don't like Heineken beer very much, but these really dark things that interiors that are also achromatic, and in this case, show off the green of the Heineken bottles. Here are a school setting and mostly a fairly neutral, cool background. A retail setting where there is a little bit of distinctive color for Lacoste. And then again, what we want to do is for retail is let the merchandise, particularly like Lacoste, show off its, show off the merchandise, show off the colors of the merchandise. And here's a residential interior, which is using really not quite a color harmony, but a combination of warm and cool and natural tones. So generally, you can take the most liberties in something like someone's home because you're just dealing with a few people, one or two people or so, and their preferences. And that's why, particularly the application of color should be fun in almost any environment. But like I say, this could appeal to some people and be a little bit off-putting for others. It's like not my taste, but somebody is really into the intensity of Indian patterns and colors. And so I'm like, go for it. Okay. Let me stop this share. And oh, yeah, I forgot to take attendance. Let me do that before I queue up the next presentation. Okay. Whoops, participants. I is here. Yogan is here. Diana is here. Denali is here. Imani is here. Christiana is here. Kira is here. I think most of you are here. Lachey is here. Tamara is here. Marilyn Sanchez is here. Ariana is here. Romina is here. Edlani is here. Moa is here. Tiffany Hall. Yes, good, she's here. And Paula is here. Mr. Figueroa is here. It's here. It's here. Lisa. Wow, everybody's here. That's great. Thank you, folks, for the really good attendance. Okay, let us, so I just take a little pause. The other reason I'm doing this today is I really want to do stuff on Wednesday that's going to, like, we'll try to keep people who are online connected, but I really want to do everything to take advantage of being on campus. So that means that we'll be using the computers, looking at materials, looking at the light box, and discussing ideas, kind of doing some brainstorming. So just all things that are really, we can't do online. That's, you know, that's where we're headed. I'm just anxious to do it, particularly for this class. So that will be upcoming. Okay, so let me get a new share. And let's see. Okay, so with all the things we've learned is, how do we work with color? How do we solve problems? Because I guarantee you, one of the things that you're going to wind up with if you go into interior design is you're going to be stuck with other people's problems that will become your problems. You're going to have a client that likes a really weird color. You're going to be stuck with an existing space that has a strange material you can't remove. You're going to have a space that's awkward, that, you know, it's not really clear. And we'll learn about lighting, like which way to go. Lighting is really helpful that way, but color can really help. All these things, color is, can help fix problems, amazingly so. It's because we are very sensitive to color in our environment. It is one of the things that we have. So that I keep getting different numbers. For the untrained eye, supposedly we can distinguish between 1 million to 6 million colors. And certain people that really are trained can do much more than that. And some people have actually an interesting mutation, a good one, where they can see even more colors. So an extra they have, where they have extra, we'll get into this with light a little bit more in the physiology of the eye. They have extra rods or cones in their eyes. So here are the questions you're going to ask and be confronted with. When you're planning color, what are the existing materials? It would be a real ordeal to remove these tiles. Could be done, but you're probably not going to say, get those tiles out of here, and they're going to laugh at you. It's like, no, we're not doing that. So you work with a color scheme that then works with the existing materials that you have. And in this case, you know, keep it into a warm hues, a little bit actually playing around with a little bit of red violet as well as an orange red. Or here, what do you do when, you know, you have a really rich dark wood? Is you may want to bring up and lighten the rest of the space. Otherwise, it would be really too dark if you also extended into a space like this, the dark colors of this wood wall. So what are the materials? What's going to be in the space? What are objects that you have no control over? Office systems, which you may or may not be specifying, they may be existing. So that these are, you know, is there going to be a consistent accent color? And how do you work with that? Or if you have Louis XIV, someone like Donald Trump, who likes this kind of stuff. I don't dislike it, actually. I just don't want to live with it. Is, you know, how do you pick up with this, these sort of rich, rosy colors, the gilding, and, you know, so you pick up the upholstery picks up the rows of the chairs. Is there already a color theme? You know, particularly that's in the corporate world. So here, you know, we've got a red-green impression from this garden supply. But then, you know, there are all the logos that, you know, use color. And, you know, how much do you work off of those or relate to those? So here are just a few of the iconic logos. And lastly, are there client specifications, which would certainly potentially come in a corporate environment that, you know, where if they care that there is, you know, an overall theme. So abstract color charts, we've been playing around with the color wheel. We'll be playing around with fan decks very shortly. And assembling presentations like this, where you would show what the dominant color in each room is. You have a rendered floor plan that at least gives us the floor finish and if there's any, you know, color on the furniture or upholstery. So here, you know, what is the main color in the room, and then the accents and furniture. Typically what we do, and we're going to try to do this for your final project, is a material sample board, whether we do it digitally or physically. And this requires a materials library. And we, you know, look at them. We put the materials adjacent to each other to see if they relate or work with each other properly. Here's an example of some material boards for office interiors. Here's some more elegant office interior materials board with a very low-key color scheme. There's not a lot of accents, but maybe that, I don't know, Germans want that. This is a typical kind of crude digital one. We get a complementary scheme. And generally when we put our samples together, is the stuff that goes on the floor, the bottom, goes on the bottom of the board. The stuff that's on the furniture and goes sort of towards the middle, as does the wall covering. And then anything that might be the field or ceiling goes towards the top. There's usually, that's that way of reading the way the relationship is going to take place in the room. Some people are very successful at reading sample boards like this. I really think that in this day, it's great to have these because these give you the actual materials, but renderings really help understand how all the things are working together in a space.
Professor, when you have a material sample like this, it's like for like a dark hotel room or something, because I look at it and I just don't imagine where would I use that such dark colors in a regular home.
Yeah, it's definitely for a, it's definitely for a commercial or office interiors. The colors are really dark, and what I think is that probably they're just small accents. It's like I don't, you know, this is the problem, is that I don't have the finished associated space with this. But you're absolutely right. This palette is very dark. There's nothing in it in the accent colors that is any kind of light tone. I don't particularly like it myself either.
I honestly don't love it, but someone did, so yeah.
Someone did like it, exactly. So these are, I should update these. These are what we used to do, was a lot of hand renderings, and you may do this particularly depending on what and there is some life that goes into the color pencil and marker. The difficulty with these is they're just giving us the floor colors, which is useful, but doesn't really tell us the whole story. So we would combine those with rendered interior elevations. But really what we are doing these days is doing sophisticated computer renderings. Again, the main way that I can tell this is a rendering is, I don't know, you guys know renderings pretty well, is the people don't look quite right and the tree looks artificial. But if you showed this to me and said, this is an actual space, I'd go, yeah, I could believe that. This used to be something that people did a lot and would be fun if you had the budget and time for a residential interior as a model, as a maquette. But unless it's a really, these are so labor intensive to do this right that these days we mostly, unless someone doesn't want to look at renderings, we mostly don't do this anymore. So how do we get the color data into the design projects? So it's through our drawing specifications, purchase orders, and our work. The cool part is when you get stuff, you get into interior design, is you get to work with manufacturers, paint manufacturers, furniture manufacturers. Let's say that there's something that you need that is not a standard. So here's a typical interior. It just shows us our furnishings. Here's one that begins to pull out finishes. There are a lot of different ways of doing this. In this case, it's by just using different line types around the borders of the rooms. Finish schedule. This would be a very detailed residential interior finish schedule where you're calling out every single object. And this would also be one where you would do it with finishes on an interior. And you would call out what each of the walls has. We didn't really discuss Pantone very much or Color Aid. We have some samples there. They are industry standard colors. And what's really good about them is that they're used across industries. So you can specify things that can be dyed, particularly textiles. This is really incredibly valuable, and Rika mentioned this about paint, although she typically works with residential interiors where it's a little easier, is you really have to make on-site adjustments to the lighting, to the space, the amount of daylight they have. So it's really the final decisions about the subtleties of color and finishes is really best done if you can paint fairly large sections of wall or have fairly large samples. It's very hard to judge, at least for most people, from very small samples, the actual final look. So with on-site adjustments, you check for errors and you keep your specifications, keep records, obviously. There's approvals that go through and some things can be approved for a trial period. If you are working in interior design, you're going to be working very closely with the dealer. When I worked in lighting design, we worked very closely and very fruitfully with a couple dealers that represented multiple lines of lighting. And it was very helpful because they were pretty willing to put things together that weren't part of their catalog if we wanted to do something custom. And the people I worked for really, which was a lot of fun, didn't like off-the-shelf lighting solutions. They were really into custom fixtures. And we would mock them up full size using Mylar and reflective materials. And it was actually really cool to do this. We don't do this anymore. We can simulate a lot of these. So, corporate identity, multiple spaces, multiple locations like Starbucks where you have standard color schemes. And so for retail interiors, that red and white of Talbot's. Or here, a really, dark color of, for restaurants. Corporate, the corporate gray, but, how those interiors work. And we look at this in history is these are schemes that are developed that become a trademark of the designer. For instance, here, Frank Lloyd Wright is famous for ambers and little bits of purple that he works into these fairly dark colors, which he's picking up from the arts and crafts movement. Or here, I think this is Dorothy Draper, who is known for really vibrant color combinations. And we'll look at some interior designers. Okay, so what can go wrong with color? This is sort of like the thumbs down, like, and always like the thing is that usually it can be fixed. So,
Can I ask you something?
Please
Like when kind of it happens that like you decide that like one time, like the trend is just having like colors and the trend is having like just crazy colors that you look at your grandma's house and you say, I wouldn't do this, or I don't know, like what exactly happens that people are like, just like, yeah, it's not time for this anymore. Let's do that.
It really depends. I mean, I know people that, I don't know a lot of people that repaint and redecorate, maybe because I know mostly older people that are kind of set in their ways. But, I think a lot of folks, will repaint and do different color schemes. When I was younger, I repainted all the time. I, had my own space. I wasn't a very good painter, but and since I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, I was using really vibrant colors, those kind of, not that I was into it, kind of almost psychedelic colors. So really intense red, orange. And then I moved to more earth tones of deep terracotta. And now I mostly like a much lighter palette because I found those were exciting, but they were claustrophobic for me. And I like a feeling of more spaciousness and warmth. And Rika kind of talked about color trends, which I wasn't even aware of, frankly, that grays are recently like really popular. And I think that sounds really depressing.
It's actually, I heard that it was trending for the last couple of years, but it's now getting out of, it's not going to be the next trend. It's like, it's over for.
It's good. I missed a couple trends. For a while, really deeply saturated colors that were really dark were very popular. And because I live in the city and with people that have row houses, I was like, these are not the right colors for these rooms because it makes them feel really small and they're already small. So it was like, they might look better in a more spacious room. They weren't my taste at all. So I actually am kind of stuck. Rika, it was funny, it was like, oh, way before that was Tuscan colors. And that's kind of what I like, which are warm kind of yellow ochres, olive greens, sort of soft but greenish or bluish grays, and white, and maybe some accents of red. So those are, those are those kind of palettes. But yeah, it's really interesting. How these are decided, I think, is through focus groups that get together and people are given a choice of colors and give their feedback. I think, it's a really interesting piece about trends and colors, and that they really, you know, they can clearly date a space. So sometimes that can be really cool. But, and you know, you want to look at a particular time or particular revival of a period. So, I mean, when I see those really strong psychedelic colors, it makes me think of the 60s and 70s. So it's, but yeah, the color trends are really interesting. And I totally missed the gray stuff, maybe because I saw like people using, you can get some richness in grays if you really, like she was talking about, if you get some really interesting undertones of, you know, warm and cool colors, but just flat gray on its own is pretty tedious, pretty boring. So I think we need to cheer up a little bit. Anyway, so we're color, this is just a random picture. Sure, I like discussing that. I hope we'll be able to do more discussions when we're sort of more around each other, particularly over color, which it's like, it's such an interesting topic for me because there is so little that's an absolute. So if you haven't considered color at all, you really didn't think about the relationship of spaces. So here it's like, you know, it's really, this is more the selection of the material. The color palette is a little odd. It's a sort of complementary if you take the brown as being a version of red, but it's too busy. There's too many patterns going on. So particularly from the living area to the dining room. Discord in the space. I mean, this is just an example that was in a decorator interior, and there's a little bit of an attempt here. There's a light green to the neutral of this, and then there's the black and white that's going on, but it's not really all working together very well. And then it's really hard with this art on the wall, particularly with this, you know, my own take was I would probably not have the really contrasting pieces if you really wanted to highlight this wall of art and all of the stuff that's in the space. I would really make it relatively neutral or a much softer combination than black, white, and this off-white, greenish off-white. Too little or too much, overuse of color or lack of bad. So this isn't a bad color. It's very pink, magenta. It's just there's way too much of it for this space. And this comes out of, you know, decorator magazines. Or here, it's like, this is giving me the blues. There's way too much blue in this, in grays. So it's kind of a downer. Or here, there's just not enough. I mean, oh, at least do something with the bed. Or, you know, there's just, this is like, looks like we're at the North Pole. We're here, a really bland office interior with no relief from any kind of color. It's just, at least they've got windows on both sides. That's something that's good. So you have to be careful. Too much or too little color, too many patterns or too much of a pattern can be busy. Like this isn't a bad pattern, but it's in a very, very small space. So it's kind of, it's a bit too much. Here, the part is that this is a furniture and fabric showroom. So that we have all these different patterns, well, there's a reason for it at least. But I would probably have calmed down the stuff in the space a little bit, just so we would really be able to focus on the fabric and wallpaper samples on the walls. And here, it's like, for some people, it's like everything is covered with roses. Is there, again, this is a residential interior. It may have really been someone's taste, but And this is where we really get into fabric selection, which is a little beyond what we're going to do in this course, but we'll do a little bit with materials palettes. Following the rules, and you've been doing this, you've been following rules. You'll get to break rules as you start looking at your cafes, if you wish to. So here, this is pretty intense. I mean, it's actually several different color harmonies are going on here, but it's just there's so much pattern going on that it's really kind of overwhelming. And I'm not really sure about that green. Or here, it's just like, here we've got a somewhat analogous scheme, but it is again, just an overwhelming amount of color. Not using color relationships, disastrous. That's a little much. But here, some very intense colors, and then we're kind of falling off that we're close to a triad, but we don't complete it. So we get, these really brightly upholstered couches and yellow, and we really could use at least a touch of blue. And there's those zebra carpets. Poor zebras. I hope they're artificial. And here we've got a slightly odd one, yellow, green, and purple, which are almost complements of each other. It's a little heavy in terms of the colors. But here's a nice combination of subtle use of colors and what would be, if you looked at it closely, would be probably a triad. And here, I kind of like this interior. I would, again, there's a little touch of yellow. I would use just a little bit more. But, so things not to do. Red can be irritating if you use lots of it, at least for most people. What you can do, unless you're like me and you don't really love pink, is you can go more to pink tones, or you just diminish the amount of red. So you go to a much lighter tint of red. I prefer to go as an accent with a neutral environment. That's my own preference. Or you could put it in areas like this, like corridors that aren't really used for very long. Orange can be irritating. Some people just find it too cheerful, and it's just like red, these warm colors. But if you do peaches and apricots, which I kind of much prefer, it really tones it down quite a bit. Or you use this as an accent with neutrals. Yellow, it can be really overused, but a toned down yellow can be good for other colors. And we're looking at something of a triad here. Green can be kind of dull and monotonous and even depressing. When we get into the cooler colors, that's a disadvantage. It can also be cheerful or calming. It's right in between being warm and cool. Use it with complementary colors, kind of enlivens it. It's a little intense, but again, this may be that person's taste. Blue can really, like we have the blues, can be kind of, it's very cool in terms of being a cool color. It can be kind of depressing. It can be interesting, but particularly where the lighting in here is blue on top of most of the colors being blue. Used with some complement, that will liven it up. It can be elegant, be dignified, it can be heavy. It's kind of nice with the contrast of the relatively light objects on the wall. So it's really your call. It's warm and cool violet, so it can be a little, disturbing. Violet, purple, whatever you want to call it, it can be really hard to work with. It can also be kind of heavy and depressing, or it can be very rich. Each of us have that. Usually we go to lighter tones and shades. or an accent. Brown can be rich and a natural color, but we particularly like it in wood tones and, you know, against a lot of neutrals. So you combine, if you're using browns, you use bright colors, particularly the complements of green, green to blue. Gray can be natural and non-chromatic, it can also be really boring. It's good neutral background. This is a little much for more intense colors. We're here where we're bringing it up with yellow against a gray background. Black is really the absence of colors. It can be really dramatic. It can create a harsh contrast. A couple of you did like checkerboard floors. And those are always like a little bit difficult because they create this vibration, a lot of contrast. It can also be dramatic. Overused in excess, a little redundant, but you know, already enough with the black. White has become pretty much a synonymous with modern design, cleanliness, modernity, this lack of you know, dark colors. It was really a response to the intense colors that came before it in the Victorian era. But here, white, where we do a neutral background for more chromatic colors, where we have reflects light, dark objects appear darker. It's typically used for trim or an accent. I have neighbors who have dark green trim, and they say, we really wish we had white. We could more easily like match the color, because trim, particularly at the base, tends to get a lot of wear. Fabric patterns. That may get a more non-traditional colors relationship to be more successful. So here, I don't know if this is successful, but this isn't, we're not in a traditional color relationship, but you know, we're mostly green, red, and then a little bit of yellow. So we've got a complement and then a yellow accent. I would probably be looking more if the colors actually mix. The bedspread does this a little bit of the green and red or pink. But here, well, yellows and browns really are monochromatic, so I don't know what I was thinking about with that slide. Here, a little bit busy, but enlivens what might be an otherwise slightly dreary, mostly brown interior. Okay, so that's good. That brings us to a stopping point. I have one more presentation that I've queued up. So we're going to take a little break, 10 minutes, 1:27, we'll start up again. And I'm just going to show you a few things, and then we're going to talk about where we go from here. So I'm going to do stop share. I am going to pause. So I wanted to wrap up. This is really the last, other than a review for the color quiz. This is the last lecture in the color sequence, although we'll continue to think about color, obviously, throughout the semester, particularly as you start thinking about the schematics of your cafe. I did want to show you an example of a really nice application of color to a cafe in, it just came in through one of these. I subscribe to a lot of these architecture blogs and newsletters, and I just wanted to share that with you. Just a second here, let me get it up. And share it. Okay, here we go, share time. Share screen. There we go. So this is a small coffee house, a little bigger than we have with a fair amount of seating. And I really like the way that color's been applied in a very thoughtful, very gentle way. It's mostly using fairly warm colors, which I think, and I like this little detail here of using the grout for the tile and actually making that a red orange. I wish there were more images, but definitely can be conveying a feeling of warmth. This is in Los Angeles, so they have a lot of glass and want to kind of shelter from the glass. And I like back here, these kind of more distinctive salmon and pink that kind of draw your eye to the counter. And here's a little diagram of it. And so there's some, throw in a few curves and translucent panels, mostly to diffuse the sunlight. And I just thought this was a really, and that kind of gives you a little diagram of the color. So we're mostly working in analogous, not too many oranges, but the yellow to orange red into the warm colors. But there's also, as you can see, and I'm encouraging you to use lots of color in your designs you've been doing so far, is there's a lot of room for neutral colors, particularly the ceiling and the floor. So let me actually get out of this. I wish there were more pictures. Yeah, this is, and the color is, it's small, bigger than the one we have, but 1,600 square feet. And the way the colors, partly inspired by, this is for the LGBT Center in Los Angeles. And so it's colorful, taking some inspirations from the rainbow flag, but not actually doing a rainbow of colors, doing a fairly tight range of colors. So anyway, I just thought this was a really pleasing example that just came in, posted earlier last week, and won some AIA awards. So anyway, Liberation Coffee House. Okay, stop that share. And we'll start now with presentation. And share, and share. So the one thing we're going to find, this is a really quick romp through history here, is that for the most part, most cultures with some variation liked pretty intense colors. Sometimes different sets of colors, and some weren't really available. But that is pretty much what we look at, and we're looking mostly really at the Western world. Asia would only reinforce that as far as a fondness for intense colors. And I think one other thing that's fairly universal is people like intense colors, that warm colors are stimulating, can be also cozy. Cool colors tend to be relaxing. So let's take a look at some of these. Ancient Egypt, lots of strong color. What survives is furniture like from King Tut's tomb, with very richly decorated with thrones and lots of ebony and gold and rich wood tones. And what we can reconstruct from the bit we know is that temple interiors often look like this, with intense reds and blues in particular. This is ancient Greece, but this is actually a little before ancient Greece. This is Knossos in Crete. That's the, wow, just went right out of my head. Minoan civilization. And we think from reconstructions that they like really intense colors. We know the Greeks did too. So this is, the postcard view of the Parthenon. But what reconstruction shows is it probably looked more like this. And we think even the lower part was colored as well, even though it's beautiful marble is painted. It's really great. If you want to get an example of that that's in real world dimensions, there is one of these at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, where it's been done in terracotta and the really bright colors that people realized or understood by the mid 19th century that that was what was really happening with these. So a lot of really bright primaries. We have a lot that survives from ancient Rome, really colorful mosaics, red, black, natural tones, lots of gilding and gold that was used by the wealthy. So here's one of the ruins in Pompeii. The Pompeian red is kind of famous and reused this sort of darkish red. This is in the Villa of the Mysteries, because we're not quite sure, well, this is some kind of rite that's going on in the dining room, or decorating a dining room. Pompeii is amazing because so much has survived. That's Herculaneum. It's frozen in time. And these are all frescoes, which is paint directly impregnating the plaster. The Pantheon is amazing. Although it's been redone a number of times, the interior is largely similar to the way it was in ancient Rome, with very rich marbles and greens and reds, yellows. Blue and green and gold dominated tile mosaics, generally because this blue, green, and gold typically were representing the celestial world, heaven. A lot of stone and marble. A lot of this came out of Rome. So these mosaics, although they're actually a little bit later, but the Hagia Sophia is a good example of that in early Christian from about the 4th or 5th century. Also Byzantine, and you can see here the green fields, Christ attending his flock, and then the gold celestial dome. St. Mark's in Venice, which is actually quite extraordinary because all the domes are lined with gold, and it gives it this floating otherworldly quality. It also shows off the wealth of the Venetians at the time. Middle Ages. Most of the color came from textiles. At least, brightly painted walls, they did use them, they faded over time. A lot of the more permanent pigments are hard to find, particularly of blues and bright yellows. So here's some ruins. Here are the wonderful unicorn tapestries that are actually at the cloisters in New York. And of course, we have the color from stained glass windows, although these are later windows, then you might see they're just, that's where you get color and the otherworldly kind of quality of the light that comes into churches with the jewel tones, particularly the deep blues, reds, and yellows. We get to the Renaissance, and this is one of those periods. Whoops. Renee. Don't know why it caught my misspelling. Didn't catch it. Renaissance. It means rebirth, where in the Renaissance, people went back to classical traditions, at least to an extent, and actually pretty much, with a couple exceptions, didn't use really intense colors. They pretty much used plaster as it was. It's not completely true, but largely true. Textiles, again, provide the color. This is San Andrea in Mantua, anyway. Great high Renaissance, very rich interior, but fairly subdued in its use of color. There's definitely strong influence coming from the Arabic world and Moorish influence. So there's a little bit more color that we see in the Renaissance in Spain. In France, as the Renaissance progressed through Baroque and Rococo, you see softer colors. But if people could afford it, they did a lot of gilding. This is palaces, interiors. So this is the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. Out here is an extraordinary garden that's reflected in these mirrors, as the people are as well, and most of it is gilding. The Renaissance, Napoleonic influence, strong colors. People were, Percier Fontaine were early archaeologists that looked and realized that people were in ancient Greece and Rome, which Napoleon wanted to connect to with all of his triumphs, military triumphs in the new empire. He wanted to make a direct connection with ancient Rome. And Percier and Fontaine and other archaeologists realized that there were really strong colors that were used in the classical world. So we get some of these over-the-top throne rooms in deep, rich colors. And again, a lot of gilding. English was a little more restrained. As always, the British tend to be stiff upper lip and a little bit more restrained. So we see this Renaissance came late to England. This is really the first Renaissance building. And you can see it's fairly understated in terms of its color. This is actually a room installation, I believe, at the Metropolitan Museum. Anyway, but we're actually looking at the natural colors of wood. As we get to the 19th century, of the late 18th century, really strong colors start to kick in. This is by the brothers Adam, and it's actually a room at the Art Museum here in Philadelphia, which is using rich reds and pinks, and then of course this brilliant turquoise, which is very different than the colors that we see typically in colonial America at about the same time. And it gets a little bit later and even more exotic, looking to influences from Asia and East Asia, West Asia in particular. Natural finishes, wood paneling and trim, brick, plaster, textiles provided color. And having done more work with this particular era, a lot of the problems was that the pigments that people used, particularly the really intense blues and bright reds, faded. So in fact, people did use really bright colors, but particularly blue pigment was hard to come across. So they used organic pigment, which faded over time. So colors were actually a little brighter. And here we get more color, and this is a German influence. And then we get, that's actually out of order here. Oh, never mind. And where people who could afford it, wallpaper. Federal period picks up sort of, it's the same period as Napoleon Regency period, bright colors, intense colors. Wallpaper, paint, and textiles. And we get to the Victorian era. At the Greek revival, fairly understated colors until people really, there was sort of a reaction, often with color, like was questioned before, there's often a reaction to what came before. So the Victorian era, as we move from the early part of the Victorian era, is very understated in colors and looks to ancient Greece and sticks with very soft, mostly whites and off-whites with a few exceptions. Once again, color in these environments is mostly coming from textiles. So sometimes you have this, just like architecture is a reaction, the use of color is a reaction, particularly when we sort of step away from using a lot of color. This is because this came on top of that kind of rich Regency, Napoleonic period of very intense colors. So that's something else that happens. Most of the time people like to use intense colors, but then there's usually a bit, ooh, I think that's what happened with the grays. People doing grays for a while was like, okay, let's step it back a little bit. Gothic revival, rich dark colors. I don't think they're that gloomy. Some of this was done, this particular project, I actually asked an interior designer to do it. So dark wood, rich interiors. Oh, I have a better, I don't know why, I have a better picture of this church. Natural colors of wood, very kind of low-key look. Shaker in the United States, very light colors, natural wood, little bits of light colored paint. As we move into the late 19th century, the craftsman style that inspired a lot of people. Gustav Stickley did a lot of furniture and interiors, a lot of wood and natural tones, stained wood, exposed brick. Still, we're doing light ceilings, relatively light ceilings. And then we get into the period where a mixture of revivals comes in when we look at contemporary interiors. It's a little bit much going on in here. And I'm not the biggest expert in furniture. There's one little modernist holdout here. And then the rest is, the sofas are a little bit different. So we have a Saarinen chair. Eclecticism was really, it still remains popular. In my recollection, was really popular in the 60s and 70s, like mixing and hearkening to the past and a lot of different periods rather than doing a strict revival of one period. Art Deco, again, was a split looking for a new language, but a rich language of decoration, as opposed to international modernism. Wonderful, this movie theater entrance is actually in Amsterdam. Been restored, but intense colors, lots of geometry, lots of abstraction, but an interest in doing a lot of color. More restrained examples were really interested in the natural color of materials like stone. And here we have, between tile and paint, a fairly rich Art Deco. Art Deco, whoops, excuse me, I slipped ahead here. Reached its peak with the Chrysler Building in the United States. The Chrysler Building, unfortunately, coincided with the Great Depression. So Art Deco in most of the country is very limited. It was done at the very end of the 20s, and a few things were built during the Great Depression. But was interested in that bringing a modern aesthetic to decoration. It started really in France, and that's where you see really excellent examples of it. This for a while was really popular. At the same time, what was happening was modernism. Mondrian in particular, black, white, and gray with primary colors, the international style. So you've probably seen paintings like this, but it also extended to interiors. And then modernism itself, this is a great example of it. You've probably all seen this if you've taken architecture history, and if you haven't. This is a reconstruction of high modernism, the Barcelona Pavilion by Mies van der Rohe, one of the leading modernist architects. And it is all, for the most part, with a few, except for a few accents that are very well placed, it's all, the richness can come from the materials, from the marble and the onyx and the other stones. But for the most part, applied color is rather suspect. So modernism really created a fairly reductive color palette. It was the one that I was working with when I was in school a little while ago. Not all of them did this, but they did stick, like Corbusier did use a fair amount of color. He also had a bit of a background as a painter. So he's another of the great modernist architects, but he, at different periods, did play around with using color in his buildings. Although, again, it sticks pretty close to primaries, although there is some green here. Primaries, because they're pure colors, were okay by the modernists. It was all the impure colors that people were doing, and too much of them, that they were reacting against. I'm quoting, I'm not saying I actually completely, but that was what they were looking at. So basically modernism was very suspect about colors. Danish modern, you may have come across, was a little bit more warm and humanizing, particularly Saarinen, who designed a lot of furniture, was an architect. Eliel Saarinen, and then there was Eero Saarinen, father and son, both architects. And this is his leaning to Art Deco interior that's in his own house in Cranbrook, Michigan. He was lured to the United States to head a distinguished school of art and architecture outside of Detroit, but very much picking up on the Art Deco colors, and although with a very gentle palette. This is by the Sun, and classic modernist interior, modern art, a few accent colors, but lots of white, natural wood, all the better to show off modern art. And here are a couple classics by Corbusier, by Vasily, I've forgotten actually, the Vasily chair will come to me, who designed that, and Charles Ames chair. You actually have chairs like this in that cafe model I gave you. 70s, brown, orange, yellow, avocado green, harvest gold, wood grain, and shag carpets. It was quite an era. So yeah, pretty bright. My recollection was the colors that were popular in that era could not possibly have come from any natural source, particularly like even the avocado green. I don't have a good picture of avocado green, but appliances were in these colors. We got an avocado green refrigerator. So a lot of intense use of color. It looked a little artificial. Postmodernism in the 80s, where they departed from modernism, which was really suspicious of color, really indulged. So this is a historic norm. People really like indulgent color, and they like particularly, depending on who you look at, these sort of more mixed colors, peach and olive green and turquoise and violet, that could be moody, could be rich, light and dark. Memphis really liked bright colors. I don't think I have a picture of their stuff here. No. So postmodernism. This is an interior by Michael Graves. And Robert Venturi is really the guy who first really created postmodernism. Just briefly about this house, he didn't use a lot of color, but he heard an architect, famous modernist architect, he said, the only color you should not paint your house is green. And this is Robert Venturi's mother's house. He said, that's a great idea. That's exactly what I'm going to paint my house, is green. It was actually Marcel Breuer, who was really into concrete. And he said, yeah, that's the one color you don't paint in. And Robert Venturi, being a bit of a rebel, said, no, I'm going to paint my house green. And there's a lot of other things about this house as far as aesthetics. But this is really the beginning, right here in Philadelphia, the beginning of what we call postmodernism. I'm very lucky. The interior really is very interesting. I have some interior photographs, and I've actually visited the house. It's very small, but it's very rich. It's really, I remember my dad, like I said, oh, we've got to visit this house. It's really famous. I was a teenager, and we finally found it. It's down a little weird back street in Chestnut Hill. And he said, that's the house. It looks like a factory. So, but he was supportive of his son aspiring to be an architect. Even I, just looking at the facade, was like, yeah, okay, Dad, I take your point.
So it's open to the public?
No, it's a private house. It has been open to the public, working through the University of Pennsylvania and the owners, and it keeps changing hands. And no, even before I actually got a tour of it, I've only been in once. I did trespass. They have no garage, so you can see whether someone's there or not. His mother, Vanna Venturi, did not have a car and did not drive. So there's no, so you can like look in and see, oh, okay, there are no cars, so there's probably no one home. In the interest of, you can't see that much really peeking in the windows. I've trespassed a lot for architecture. I'll admit it. Even places where they had big signs in local language that said no trespassing. Just because you make a pilgrimage to see a building, it's like you have an iconic house in particular, you expect a certain amount of traffic. But fortunately, a lot of modernists didn't believe in garages. I guess that was too middle class. So you can look and see like, oh, there's no cars. So a typical suburban house like this is like nobody's home. So I wish it was open regularly, and it just, I think, has a new owner who's going to do a mother-in-law addition near the street, but far away from the existing building. It was just written up in the Inquirer a little while ago. So let's see, how are we doing on time? I'm just going to flip through these rather than so what do we have in modern situations? We have indoor, outdoor spaces, changeable color, particularly through lighting, different kinds of accessories, information, historic, restoration, and even projected light. So here, you know, this has become really popular, these outdoor kitchens. Or space that's both sort of interior and exterior. Outdoor dining, you know, natural materials, and or maybe not. Here, you know, accents of some you know, really strong primaries. So all these things where colors can be changed or refreshed. You know, obviously here, you know, a few pillows introduce a little, and the carpet introduce some color into this. Here, a great big exhibition space that can be modified in a number of ways. And here we start to get into light, where we get a bit of a variety of, you know, the brightness of the interior and the colors. And accessories and table settings, flower arrangements. a very strange looking Christmas. I think this is a Tiffany Christmas, not quite. Obviously things like fabrics and upholstery. Accents that are temporary, that lend a color. Artwork. Table settings. It's a little bit much, but you know, here's mostly art and fabric that really giving color to this space. It really depends on your situation, but if art is really the focus, unless it's of a particular period, you usually want a fairly neutral background. I mean, this is kind of cool. Put these African art in these niches and then use an overall color of yellow. But generally with modern art is that we stick with a very light, white, neutral background. Or we do crazy things with really oversized, trippy flowers. Historic restoration really, which is what I've done, really brought us into historic palettes in a way that was much more rigorous. And we look at this and we think that historic palettes were very subdued. This is the Last Supper before restoration. And this is the colors that Da Vinci actually after restoration. It was quite controversial because people were so used to seeing it look like this, that this was a real shock. But in fact, the Renaissance in painting, they were using these bright, really brilliant colors, particularly these reds and blues. We're here, whitewashing and then restoring it to its original colors. And here, a church that was restored to much richer, brighter colors that it had. We get into lighting, and lighting now begins to give us ability to change light colors or the texture of the walls. LEDs can come in colors and shift colors with the right controls. So here, shoes, one background, and another background. This is really effective because we're not so much concerned about the color of the shoes as we are about seeing their silhouette. Fountains with LEDs in them, water coming down. Projected light and color. And we'll talk about this more in lighting. And so yeah, with the last 10 minutes, this was stuff that was really put together mostly by an associate who's an interior designer. Color and current practice, Kim. And she just highlighted people she thought were contemporary or influence on contemporary architects that architecture and design. So really Michael Graves, as far as color, is Mr. Postmodernism. He really came in and said this boring palette of whites and grays and blacks and a few primary colors is like, and he was very adventurous in his use of color. Whoops, sorry. So just some examples. Now they look perhaps a little bit dated or maybe a little heavy-handed, but they were really exciting when this first happened. I have like a personal, I went to, because Princeton is so close by, he taught at Princeton for many, many years. And I saw the show of work and everything was black and white or neutral colors. And there was this one thing in the corner that was done in colored pencil. It was all these brilliant, rich colors. And it was Michael Graves. This was like in the around circa 1980. So Michael Graves, I know because he started really mostly as an architect and did a lot of interiors. These other people I don't know as well. Oops, just flip through these. Norman Diekman. So we get into furniture designers. Vignelli, who is also an architect and graphic designer, really bold use of color, particularly reds and blacks and whites. And a lot of art. A little chapel that was designed. And we have these. Kelly Hoppen, luxurious interiors. Generally really rich colors, a little monochrome, but does anyone have a subscription to Architectural Digest? AD? Well, you
I
should,
do.
yeah, it's fun. I used to have a subscription and then they upped the rates a lot. And I was like, you know, there's actually good stuff in it. And you look at what people aspire to in Lives of the Rich and Famous. And I quite enjoyed flipping through it and reading the articles. It was just after a while, it was only about basically the super rich. And I got a little tired of that, but it's what a lot of people aspire to. So I enjoy it. I have a friend who gives me old copies of it, has a subscription still. And we get into green design, simple materials, you know, natural finishes. Dorothy Draper is the one that I kind of like. She's no longer with us. She was the designer, bold colors and really encapsulated Hollywood glamour. So really working from the 30s and 40s onwards. And really bold use of colors, which is at once possibly a little dated, but looks really fresh to me now. I really like her work. This can be a little crazy. I think that's the end. It is. Okay, this last part here really isn't on the test. This was just to interest you, tempt you, look at things. You may, particularly if you get something like Architectural Digest, you may get inspiration from all kinds of things. Yeah, the other thing with Digest is it's mostly residential interiors. So it does include other things, but it's mostly about that. And, you know, luxurious interiors. So, about what's going on as far as high-end design and interiors, it's a really good resource, particularly in the residential realm. Let me see, I think that was it. Okay, stop that share. Okay, so we're kind of wrapping up on conclusion time. I'll do a quick lightning review, which should already be posted. If it's not, I'll make sure it's up there. For your all-important lighting quiz, 10 questions, multiple guess, multiple choice, kind of annoying, but that just works really well with Canvas. And you'll have time next week. If we run a little long, I've given folks, turned it in all the way till midnight next Monday. So don't panic about it, but I just encourage you to be rested and take your time, and you should get all 10 questions right. And I'll specifically go over what's going to be on the test. Like this last stuff I just talked about, these designers, that's just to stimulate or entertain you, not something that there'll be questions about that. So with that is, again, are there questions? Will this be on the exam? It's like, no, well, that last little bit there with those modern designers, no, not really.
The text is for Wednesday, this Wednesday,
Next Monday.
next Monday. Oh, okay.
But yeah, it's, and you'll have lots of time to do it. And it just, the biggest thing is to, with a couple of the trickier questions, all of the above are true, none of the above are true, two of the above are true. You just have to slow down a little bit. Some of the others are pretty easy. So you can submit it multiple times. So just to make you look, and I'll go over, we'll do a review on Monday just before I open up the exam. So great. Did I answer your question? I can't see your hand up against that background, but I see it now. I saw it in the participants. So great. So if I didn't get images from everyone, but the important thing is for Wednesday, this Wednesday is we're on campus, and that your model should be colored in, or you bring it with you and I'll go over how to do it and I'll give you a little more hands-on help. And then we will plunge into rendering it, which some of you already know how to do, which would be really, you see, that's why I'm putting that off till Wednesday, because the people that do know how to render, maybe you can help the folks that don't. Although we're not going to do anything very elaborate with the renderings yet. It's pretty straightforward. We're just going to shoot the model into Lumion, synchronize it, render it, and send out save images. And that's all you'll need to do is send me images at the end. You don't have to assemble it into a board or anything. We'll get more into assembling a board with the final project and with the next coloring culture. So that's all I got for now. And we'll see you folks on Wednesday. So shoot me, prioritizing this stuff, shoot me color schemes if you haven't done so already, that you've done, you just file, export image, JPEG, use one of the views. Hi, your hand is back up.
Yeah, I did work a little bit on those color this weekend. I had a question. Can we meet today if possible? Because I know you have another class after this.
Yeah, sure. At 4:30.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do have a question about that. I was working on some.
Okay. Great. That's what office
Doctor,
hours.
did you mention what room we're meeting in on Wednesday?
Yeah, I have to, it's in the suite. It's, I believe, shoot. It's the one
I
on
think
the
it's W202.
202. I think that's right. It's not it's not the studio. It's not the one in the back, 203. So it's, yeah, 02, which is right on the corridor. It's the one on the right on the diagonal corridor. I know that's where we will be. Great. Try to
Great,
get
thank
there a little early. See you. Hope to see you all there. And then.
Thank you, Professor. See you Wednesday.
See you Wednesday.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you, Professor. See you at 4:30.
See you at 4:30.
All right.